My name is Francesco Cavalli, and I need to tell you about the day a dying teenager prophesied my complete destruction, named the three men who would betray me, and save my soul in the process. I'm not talking metaphorically here. I'm talking about specific dates, specific names, and evidence that appeared in impossible places. This is about how Carlo Acutis, a 15-year-old kid dying of leukemia, somehow knew exactly when my life would explode, who would light the fuse, and where I'd find the proof that would save me. But let me start at the beginning, because you need to understand who I was to appreciate why I needed to be destroyed. In October of 2006, I was Bishop of Perugia, and I wore that title like armor. I'd been consecrated at 46, the youngest bishop in Umbria, and people whispered that I'd be wearing a cardinal's red hat before 60. I didn't discourage those whispers. I'd modernized the entire diocese, digitized our archives, created youth programs that other dioceses copied, and managed our finances so efficiently that we'd tripled our charitable giving in 5 years. The local press called me a visionary. The priests called me demanding. The Vatican called me promising. I called myself essential. Looking back now, 12 years later, I can see the pride like rot through wood. But at the time, I genuinely believed I was serving God through excellence. I worked 16-hour days, attended every important meeting, appeared on television to discuss church matters, met with politicians and business leaders. My calendar was color-coded and managed by 2 secretaries. I had no time for inefficiency and definitely no time for sentimentality. My prayer life had become transactional. I rushed through morning office, skipped evening prayer entirely because I was too exhausted, and told myself that administrative work was itself a form of prayer. The work of the diocese was the work of God, right? Managing millions of euros in church property, overseeing 200 priests, coordinating with Rome on appointments and policies, all of this was sacred work. Or so I convinced myself while my soul quietly suffocated under achievements and accolades. I treated my priests like employees, not brothers. I evaluated their performance with spreadsheets, measured their worth by attendance numbers and donation levels. The 3 priests closest to me, my inner circle in the diocesan curia, were chosen for competence, not compassion. Father Giuliano was my vicar general, a sharp canonist who could navigate church law like a lawyer. Father Stefano handled our finances with meticulous precision. Father Matteo served as chancellor, managing all our official communications and documentation. Together, we ran the diocese like a corporation, efficient, professional, cold. I'm telling you all this so you understand the man who walked into room 304 of San Gerardo Hospital in Monza on October 10th, 2006. I didn't want to be there. My secretary had been pestering me for 3 days about this visit. Some teenager with leukemia had specifically asked for a bishop's blessing before he died. The request had come through complicated channels. Someone knew someone who knew my secretary, and apparently this kid wouldn't stop asking. I was annoyed. I had important meetings scheduled. There was a television interview about the church's role in Italian politics. A visiting delegation from the Vatican needed to be entertained. I had things that actually mattered to attend to. But my secretary kept saying the same thing over and over, that this boy was special, that people were already talking about him, that it would look bad if I refused. So I went out of obligation, not compassion. I planned to be in and out in 10 minutes. Before I continue, I'm really curious. Where are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories reach. And if you're finding value in this story, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep sharing these experiences with all of you. The hospital room was small and smelled like disinfectant trying to mask something worse. Carlo Acutis was propped up on pillows, his skin gray, his eyes sunken, but smiling. Actually smiling. He had a rosary wrapped around his swollen fingers, and when I entered in my full Episcopal regalia, purple cassock and pectoral cross gleaming, he looked more concerned for me than for himself. I went through the motions, made the sign of the cross, muttered the blessing formula I'd said 1,000 times, barely looking at him. I was already mentally reviewing my talking points for the television interview. Then he spoke, and his voice was weak but absolutely clear. He thanked me for coming, addressed me properly as Your Excellency, and then said something that made me actually focus on him for the first time. He told me he hadn't asked for the blessing for himself, but for me. I must have looked confused because he repeated it. The blessing was for me, not for him. He said I was going to need it more than he would. I asked him what he meant, probably with irritation in my voice, and then he told me, in that matter-of-fact way that teenagers have, that in exactly 6 years, on October 12th, 2012, I would be publicly humiliated. He used that exact word, humiliated. He said accusations would surface about financial misconduct, that documents would appear in the press showing I'd diverted millions of euros from diocesan funds into personal accounts. He said I would lose everything, my position, my reputation, the trust of everyone who knew me. Then he did something that made my blood stop moving. He named them. Father Giuliano, my Vicar General. Father Stefano, my financial administrator. Father Matteo, my chancellor. He said these 3 men, my closest collaborators, were plotting against me out of envy. They wanted the power I had, and they were preparing to take it by destroying me. I remember staring at this dying boy, trying to understand how he could possibly know those names. My inner circle was private, rarely publicized. How could a teenager from Milan know the administrative structure of the Perugia diocese? Then he told me something even more impossible. He said that when everything collapsed, when I was at my lowest point, I should look in the secret safe in the cathedral sacristy. There would be an envelope there with my name on it, and inside would be my defense, proof of who had conspired against me. I left that hospital room shaking, not with fear, but with anger. Who did this kid think he was? How dare he speak to a bishop like that, predicting doom and claiming mystical knowledge about my staff? I rationalized it immediately. The boy was dying, probably hallucinating from medication or fever. Someone had fed him information as a cruel prank. Maybe he'd read about my diocese in some article, and his sick mind had constructed this bizarre fantasy. Carlo died 2 days later. I saw the obituary in the newspaper and felt a brief stab of guilt for being so dismissive of him. But I had work to do, important work, and within a week I'd forgotten about the whole strange encounter. My life continued at its frantic pace. More meetings, more programs, more television appearances, more carefully managed image building. The years rolled forward. 2007 came and went. 2008, 2009, 2010. I got busier, more successful, more convinced of my own importance. The Vatican consulted me on youth ministry initiatives. I published articles in theological journals. My name appeared on short lists for bigger positions. Everything was going exactly according to the plan I'd built for my ecclesiastical career. In 2011, I barely remembered Carlo at all. If someone had mentioned his name, I might have vaguely recalled the dying teenager who'd said strange things, but it would have been like remembering a weird dream, fuzzy and insignificant. Then 2012 arrived. September of 2012, to be specific. And I started noticing things. Small things at first, the kind of details you dismiss until you can't anymore. Meetings of my curia happening without me being notified. Conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered a room. Father Giuliano suggesting I delegate more financial oversight to Father Stefano because I was too busy with pastoral matters. Father Matteo volunteering to handle more of the external communications. They were always so helpful, so concerned about my workload. On October 10th, 2012, exactly 6 years after I'd visited Carlo, Father Giuliano requested an urgent private meeting. He told me there were rumors circulating, serious allegations about financial irregularities in the diocese. He said documents were being passed around, and he strongly advised that I request a voluntary investigation from the Vatican to clear my name before things got worse. I remember his expression, so earnest, so concerned. Looking back, I can see now he was testing whether I suspected anything. I didn't. I was completely blindsided. October 12th, 2012. The date Carlo had specified. I woke up to 17 missed calls and my phone exploding with messages. The local newspaper had published a devastating front-page story. The headline read, "Bishop of Perugia accused of embezzling €2 million." There were bank statements with my signature, email exchanges planning transfers, testimony from anonymous sources describing my lavish lifestyle and expensive tastes. None of it was true, but all of it looked absolutely real. The article had copies of everything. Transfer orders moving money from diocesan accounts to what appeared to be my personal accounts in Switzerland. Email exchanges between me and fictional business partners discussing investments and luxury purchases. A paper trail so detailed and convincing that I stared at it in horror, wondering if I was losing my mind. Had I done these things and somehow forgotten? No, impossible. But how could all of this exist if it wasn't real? The Vatican responded within hours. They ordered my immediate suspension while they investigated. I was told to vacate the episcopal residence, forbidden from celebrating Mass publicly, instructed to make no statements to the press. A canonical investigation would determine whether I'd be permanently removed from office and potentially defrocked. My life ended in a single morning. The media was vicious. Camera crews camped outside wherever I went. Every newspaper ran the story with increasingly damning details. Financial experts analyzed the alleged transactions on television, discussing my supposed greed and corruption. Editorials called for my imprisonment. The word wolf appeared in headlines, as in wolf in shepherd's clothing. People I'd ordained, people whose children I'd baptized, people whose marriages I'd blessed, they all turned away. Some with sadness, some with disgust, some with that particular satisfaction people feel when the powerful fall. I had nowhere to go. The diocese provided a small apartment in Rome while the investigation proceeded, and I lived there like a ghost. No clerical collar, no pectoral cross, no episcopal ring. Just a disgraced man in civilian clothes, unrecognized and utterly alone. At night, I would sit in that apartment and cry. Not dignified, silent tears, but desperate, choking sobs that came from somewhere I didn't know existed inside me. I prayed for the first time in years, really prayed. Not the rushed formulas I'd been reciting, but actual crying out to God, demanding to know why this was happening. I'd given my life to the church. I'd worked myself nearly to death serving the diocese. How could God allow me to be destroyed by lies? And in those dark hours, usually around 3 or 4 in the morning, when the despair was worst, I would hear a voice. Not audible, nothing dramatic, just a persistent thought that wouldn't leave me alone. The voice kept saying the same thing over and over. The secret safe in the cathedral sacristy. Look in the secret safe. I tried to dismiss it. I told myself it was just my mind grasping for Carlo's crazy prophecy, because I was desperate for anything that might explain this nightmare. But the voice wouldn't stop. Every night, the same insistence. The safe. The envelope. Look. 3 months after my world collapsed, in January of 2013, I made a decision that felt completely insane. I bought a train ticket to Perugia, wore ordinary clothes and a baseball cap, and traveled back to the city I'd been forced to leave. I waited until after midnight, then used my old keys to enter the cathedral through a side entrance. I was terrified someone would recognize me, that security cameras would catch me, that I'd be arrested for trespassing in a building I'd once presided over. The cathedral was dark and empty. I made my way to the sacristy using my phone's flashlight, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. Behind a painting of St. Francis, there was an old safe that almost nobody knew about. I'd discovered it years ago while having the sacristy renovated. It dated back to the 1800s and used a combination lock that I'd reset to a sequence only I knew. I opened it, and there, impossible but undeniable, was a white envelope with my name written in handwriting I recognized instantly. The same childish script from the blessing cards I'd received years ago, the ones Carlo's mother had sent after he died. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely tear it open. The letter inside was dated October 8, 2006, 2 days before I'd visited the hospital. Carlo had written it when he was dying, somehow knowing I would read it 6 years and 3 months later. He apologized for the pain I was experiencing, but said it was necessary. My pride was killing my soul, and God had permitted this humiliation to save me from something worse than disgrace, to save me from dying with a dead spirit inside an impressive career. Then he gave me specifics that made me dizzy. He told me that on Father Stefano's computer there was a hidden folder called Project Cavalli. The password was Umbria 2012. Inside that folder was everything. The original documents they'd created to frame me, the real bank accounts they'd set up, the communications between the 3 conspirators planning my destruction over 18 months. They'd thought they were clever by keeping digital records they could quickly access and reference as they built the false case, but they'd made a critical mistake. They'd kept everything because they were so confident they'd never be caught. Carlo's letter told me to go to the central police station in Perugia, ask specifically for Inspector Andrea Martini, show him the letter, and request that he immediately confiscate Father Stefano's computer before the conspirators realized their plot was unraveling. Carlo even noted that Inspector Martini was a practicing Catholic who attended daily Mass and would be more likely to take seriously a claim involving the beatified teenager whose cause for canonization was already gaining momentum. I read that letter 5 times, sitting on the cold floor of the sacristy, crying and laughing and feeling like I was losing my mind. This was impossible. Carlo had been dead for over 6 years. How could an envelope have appeared in a safe only I could open? Who had put it there? When? How did Carlo know about Inspector Martini? About the specific folder, name, and password? About details that shouldn't exist yet when he wrote the letter? But I had nothing to lose. At dawn, I went to the police station. Inspector Martini was starting his shift, and when I approached him in my civilian clothes and cap, he didn't recognize me at first. Then I told him who I was, and his face registered shock and something that might have been pity. I showed him Carlo's letter and told him everything, knowing I sounded completely insane. He read the letter slowly, 3 times. Then he asked me questions, testing whether this was some desperate fantasy of a broken man. But the specificity troubled him. The folder name, the password, the accusation against specific priests. These weren't the vague claims of someone grasping at straws. He told me he'd need to consult with his superiors, that what I was asking for would require a judge's order, that this seemed incredible, but he couldn't ignore it either. It took 4 days. 4 days of me hiding in a cheap hotel room, terrified the whole thing would fall apart, that I'd be arrested for making false accusations, that I'd end up in a psychiatric facility. But Inspector Martini must have argued persuasively with his bosses, because on the 5th day, they obtained a warrant and raided the diocesan offices. They confiscated Father Stefano's computer, and, from what I learned later, he nearly fainted when the police walked in. He tried to claim the computer was personal property, demanded to call his lawyer, but the warrant was specific and legally sound. The forensic analysis took 3 weeks. When the results came through, the investigator told Inspector Martini that in 20 years of police work, he'd never seen such a comprehensively documented conspiracy. The Project Cavalli folder contained 847 files. Every communication between the 3 priests for 2 years. Detailed plans for how to create false bank accounts using sophisticated forgery techniques. Drafts of the emails they'd planted. Records of bribes paid to a dishonest accountant who'd helped them manipulate the financial documents. Even conversations about what they'd do once I was removed and Father Giuliano ascended to bishop. They'd kept everything because they were arrogant. They'd assumed I'd be so thoroughly destroyed that no investigation would dig deep enough to find their digital tracks. And they'd never imagined that a dead teenager would leave instructions for exactly where to look. Hey, quick pause here. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Leave a comment telling me your location. It's always amazing to see this community from all over the world. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Your support means everything and helps me continue telling stories that matter. The truth exploded across Italy in April of 2013. The same newspapers that had destroyed my reputation now ran front-page retractions. The 3 priests were arrested, laicized through an emergency canonical process, and faced criminal charges for fraud, conspiracy, and forgery. The Vatican issued a formal apology and full exoneration. My name was cleared completely. But here's what surprised everyone. When the Vatican offered to reinstate me as Bishop of Perugia, with a promotion to a larger archdiocese being discussed as compensation for what I'd endured, I said no. When they pressed, explaining that this was my chance to resume my career trajectory with even more prestige after surviving such an ordeal, I refused again. I told them I wanted to be transferred as an ordinary priest to a small rural parish near Assisi. The papal nuncio thought I was having some kind of breakdown. He kept saying I was still young, only 52, that I could serve as an archbishop for decades, that my experience and proven innocence made me valuable to the church. I just shook my head. I'd finally understood what Carlo had been trying to tell me in that hospital room 7 years earlier. The blessing he gave me wasn't protection from the conspiracy. It was protection from myself. The humiliation I'd suffered hadn't just cleared my name. It had demolished the person I'd built my identity around. The ambitious bishop who measured worth by position and power, who saw priests as subordinates and administration as prayer, who had sacrificed his soul for the appearance of success. That man needed to die so someone else could live. Someone who actually remembered why he'd become a priest in the first place. I'm Father Francesco now, not Bishop Francesco. I serve a parish of maybe 70 people, most of them elderly, in a tiny village near the Basilica of St. Francis. I celebrate morning Mass for whoever shows up, usually about 15 people. I visit the sick, hear confessions in a small wooden booth that smells like furniture polish, help tend the vegetable garden behind the rectory. I have time to pray, hours of it. Real prayer, where I actually listen instead of just reciting formulas. I know my parishioners' names, their grandchildren's names, their struggles and their joys. I've never been happier in my entire life. The person I was in 2006, the man Carlo looked at with those dying eyes, he was headed for disaster. Not the disaster of false accusations, but something worse. A prestigious career built on pride, ending in a cold heart and a disconnected soul. I would have died as a cardinal or archbishop probably, surrounded by honors and tributes, and gone before God as a spiritual corpse in expensive vestments. The conspiracy that almost destroyed me actually saved me by destroying the idol I'd made of my own success. People ask me how Carlo did it. How did a 15-year-old boy predict the exact date of my humiliation 6 years in the future? How did he know which 3 priests would betray me when even I didn't suspect them? How did an envelope written in 2006 appear in a safe only I could open, with information about computer folders and passwords that wouldn't exist until 2012? How did he know about Inspector Martini, who wasn't even working in Perugia in 2006, but transferred there in 2009? I don't have answers that make rational sense. I can tell you that multiple investigations confirm the letter was written in 2006, the paper and ink dated to that period. I can tell you the safe had never been opened between when I last used it in 2005 and when I opened it in 2013. I can tell you the information in the letter was so specific that coincidence isn't a remotely adequate explanation. What I believe, what I know in the deepest part of me, is that Carlo saw beyond time because he'd already moved beyond it. He was dying when he gave me that prophecy, already 1 foot in eternity. And from that perspective, he could see the entire path laid out. He could see my pride, see the conspiracy forming, see my humiliation, see my redemption. And somehow, through means I'll never understand in this life, he left me the tools I'd need to survive the fire he knew was coming. But more than the prophecy, more than the impossible evidence, what Carlo did was prepare me to receive the humiliation properly. Because I'd been warned, because I'd dismissed the warning for 6 years and then watched it come true exactly as predicted, I couldn't retreat into self-pity or paranoid bitterness when everything fell apart. I knew the conspiracy was real, but I also knew my spiritual pride was just as real. The humiliation wasn't punishment, it was surgery. I visit Carlo's tomb in Assisi regularly now. It's always crowded with young people, teenagers mostly, taking selfies and leaving prayers written on little notes. I kneel there and thank him for saving me from myself, for seeing what I couldn't see, for caring enough about a proud bishop's soul to reach across death and plant evidence in impossible places. The 3 priests who conspired against me, they're out of prison now. Their sentences weren't long, fraud cases rarely are. Last I heard, Father Giuliano is working as a tax consultant in Milan, no longer in ministry. Father Stefano moved to South America, trying to start over where his scandal isn't known. Father Matteo wrote me a letter a few years ago, apologizing. It was brief and awkward, the kind of apology that knows words are inadequate but makes the attempt anyway. I wrote back telling him I forgave him, that I'd forgiven all 3 of them years ago. I meant it. How could I not forgive the tools God used to dismantle my pride? What I want you to understand, if you're listening to this, is that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you is actually the rescue you needed but would never have chosen. If you're in leadership, if you've built your identity on success and position, if you're measuring your worth by titles and achievements, please hear this. There's a cancer growing in that. A spiritual cancer that will hollow you out until you're impressive on the outside and dead on the inside. If your world is falling apart right now, if you're being accused or betrayed or publicly humiliated, don't waste the crisis. Ask yourself what needed to die so something true could live. Ask whether the person you were building is actually the person you were called to be. The conspiracy against me was real, the malice was genuine, but my need to be broken was just as real. God will use anything, even evil men's schemes, to save the souls of those He loves. I'm 64 now, 12 years past the humiliation that redefined my life. I'll never be a cardinal. I'll never have my name in history books or be consulted by the Vatican on important matters. I'll likely die as a parish priest in a village most people have never heard of. And I thank God for that every single day. Because I'm finally doing what I was ordained to do 38 years ago. Shepherding souls, not managing institutions. Celebrating the Eucharist with love, not efficiency. Living as a priest, not performing as an executive. Carlo Acutis, the teenager with leukemia who spent his short life creating a website, cataloging Eucharistic miracles, and loving his faith without pretension. He had more spiritual authority at 15 than I had at 46 with all my titles and achievements. He could see across time because he lived in eternity while still breathing on earth. He navigated computer folders and sacristy safes with the same ease, because when you're that close to God, the barriers between impossible and possible dissolve. The last thing his letter told me, the line I've memorized and repeat every morning, was this: when you're restored, don't return to being who you were. Become who God called you to be. Not an executive managing a religious corporation, but a pastor caring for souls. Not a voice on television discussing theological abstractions, but a presence in a small church, listening to ordinary people's ordinary struggles and pointing them toward extraordinary grace. That's what I'm trying to do now, in my little parish where nothing important happens by the world's standards. We don't make news. We don't have innovative programs. We don't hit metrics or achieve targets. We just try to love God and each other, day by ordinary day, Mass by ordinary Mass, prayer by ordinary prayer. And in that ordinariness, I've found what my ambition never could have given me: actual peace. The kind that doesn't depend on position or prestige or anyone's opinion. The kind that survives humiliation and betrayal, because it's rooted in something those things can't touch. If Carlo was here now, I think he'd smile that gentle smile I remember from the hospital and say something simple. Maybe that God's mercy looks like destruction sometimes, because what we're building needs to be demolished. Maybe that the conspirators thought they were destroying me, but were actually cooperating with grace in ways they'll never comprehend. Maybe that being a good bishop starts with being a good priest, and being a good priest starts with being a good man who knows he's nothing without God's breath in his lungs. I don't know if I'm a good priest even now. I'm trying. I still catch glimpses of the old pride sometimes. Moments where I think I know better than my parishioners, or where I'm tempted to measure my worth by visible results. But Carlo's prophecy, fulfilled down to the last detail, haunts me in the best way. It reminds me that I serve a God who sees everything, who loves enough to let us be humiliated if that's what saves us, and who sends teenagers with leukemia to plant evidence in locked safes because a bishop's soul matters that much. The conspiracy was real. The betrayal was genuine. The humiliation was deserved. The rescue was miraculous. And the life I'm living now, quiet and small and mostly hidden from any spotlight, is infinitely better than the glittering path I was racing down toward spiritual death. If your life is collapsing, if people you trusted are betraying you, if your reputation is being shredded in public, I can't promise you'll find an envelope with impossible evidence that clears your name. What I can promise is that God wastes nothing, not even conspiracies, not even humiliation, not even the death of everything you built your identity on. Sometimes we have to lose absolutely everything before we can find the one thing that actually matters. Carlo knew that. A 15-year-old dying of cancer understood what a bishop with 17 years of experience couldn't see. Holiness isn't measured by achievement or position. It's measured by love. And love sometimes has to destroy what pride built so it can create something true in the ruins. That's my story. The bishop who was publicly destroyed, rescued by a dead teenager who somehow saw the whole thing coming and left impossible evidence in a locked safe. I'm not Bishop Francesco anymore. I'm just Father Francesco, shepherd of 70 souls in a tiny parish, trying to live the vocation I should have been living all along. Humbler, quieter, infinitely more grateful. And every October 12th, I celebrate a private Mass of Thanksgiving, not for being proven innocent, though that mattered, but for being proven wrong about everything I thought made me valuable. That's the real miracle Carlo gave me. Not prophecy or impossible evidence, but the gift of seeing my own soul clearly enough to want to change it before it was too late. If you take anything from this, let it be this. Trust the humiliation. Trust the betrayal. Trust the collapse. God is a surgeon who sometimes has to cut deep to save the patient. And saints, even teenage saints who love computers and the Eucharist, they can see the whole operation from beginning to end while we're still screaming on the table. The conspiracy was real, but my need for it was more real. Let yourself be saved, even if the salvation looks like destruction. Especially if it looks like destruction. Because on the other side of death, in whatever form it comes, there's resurrection. Not back to what you were, but forward into what you were always meant to become. That's what Carlo gave me. That's what I'm trying to live now. And that's why I'm telling you this story. So you'll know that when your world falls apart, check the locked safes. Check the impossible places. Your rescue might already be waiting there, planted by someone who loved you enough to see your future and prepare your salvation before you even knew you needed saving.